I knew it was a setup the second I stepped through my parents' door. No scent of supper, no clatter in the kitchen, just lemon polish and that chemical sweetness of fresh-cut lilies, the kind my mother used when she wanted the house to feel like a showroom instead of a home. I'm Crosby Archer. I'm 57 now, but I was 27 then, living alone outside Pine Hollow, Georgia, thinking distance would buy me peace. That night, it didn't. The lock clicked. My father took his place near the exit without a word. My mother slid paperwork across white cloth like she was serving dessert. "Tonight," she said, "you'll sign." I didn't shout. I didn't bolt. I kept my face still, because before I ever walked in, I'd already made sure the right people would know where to look. Quick note, before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. And let's continue. So I waited, quiet and still, like they wanted. That wasn't surrender. That was a man counting steps backward through every shove they'd dressed up as concern. Because before that night, I was the type who kept his head down and figured things out the hard way. I worked at a nonprofit animal shelter on the outskirts of Pine Hollow. Intake coordinator, mostly adoptions and transport logs. Not flashy, not loud, but real. I dealt with scared animals and overwhelmed people, and I liked knowing I could make something calmer by the time it left my hands. My mother hated it. She never said it plain, but I didn't need her to. To her, a man only counts if he's standing in front of a crowd with a title worth clapping for. Something she could repeat at HOA meetings while pretending not to brag. She ran that neighborhood association like it was a courtroom, and every Sunday potluck was another hearing. If she couldn't control you directly, she'd control the story around you. That was always her sharpest tool, reputation. She didn't need to scream, she just needed a whisper placed right. My dad didn't whisper. He wasn't loud either. He just took up space. He ran a boat motor shop out by State Route 18 and talked with his hands more than his mouth. When my mother wanted something enforced, he didn't argue. He just blocked the nearest exit. Years before the dinner, I'd already started pulling away. It wasn't dramatic, just fewer Sunday visits, more space between calls, missed birthdays I didn't apologize for. I thought distance would dull the noise. But they didn't fight it. They adjusted. Guilt, sudden crises, stories I hadn't lived being told like warnings to neighbors. And always, that look from my father, like I'd spit on the name carved into his belt buckle. It got public. That's when it shifted. One Labor Day, cookout behind the community center, my mom introduced me to a visiting church couple like I was a dog with no papers. "This is Crosby," she said, smiling wide. Still renting, still single, still working with puppies instead of people. She laughed. So did they. So did everyone else. Because that's what folks in towns like ours do when they smell blood. They laugh fast so it doesn't land on them. I stood there holding a paper plate with soggy coleslaw, thinking, I'm a grown man being dressed up like a warning label. That night, I drove home, stopped at a CVS, and bought a cheap notebook, just lined paper and a black cover. At first, it was for my sanity, a place to write down the way things actually happened before my mother's version started spreading, the date she showed up at my job unannounced, the message she left about how a real man doesn't hide from his own family, the time my dad canceled helping with repairs after I skipped dinner 2 Sundays in a row. Little things, but they added up. Then it stopped feeling like journaling. It started feeling like gathering evidence. 3 months in, I told myself it wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. People like my mother operate in fog. They thrive in memory gaps and he said, she said. I wasn't going to give her that anymore. Every voicemail she left, every text she sent, every sideways remark I overheard at the grocery store, if it carried her name or her tone, it went in the book. I didn't show it to anyone, not even Maris, not at first, but she saw it anyway. Aunt Maris Vaughn is the kind of person who doesn't miss patterns. She works payroll for the school district, which means she notices when numbers shift the wrong direction. One afternoon, over sweet tea on her porch, she asked me if I ever felt like my mother was directing more than asking. I laughed once. Then I told her everything. Turns out Maris had been through it herself. Controlling husband, long divorce, years of being treated like a houseplant with a credit score. She nodded through my story like it was déjà vu. She was the one who said, you keep records for the day they try to rewrite the past. Over the next few years, the notebook grew, not with rage, just facts. My mother demanded to know who I was seeing, why I wasn't married, why I hadn't secured a future. She'd talk like she was worried, but her eyes would go cold when I didn't give the answer she wanted. My father didn't yell. He just took things away, small favors, big silences. That old method of his, comply or feel the shift. There was something else I remembered one night, writing past midnight. Years back, my mother had insisted on helping me get set up with online banking, said she'd keep a copy of my passwords just in case. I let her. Back then I still believed she meant well. Now I knew better. That wasn't help. That was preloading control. The notebook wasn't a diary. It wasn't therapy. It was a weapon I hoped I'd never have to use, but one I was absolutely going to keep loaded. Because in a town like Pine Hollow, memories bend. But records stay straight. That's why the call from Maris landed so hard. It came Tuesday around noon, while I sat in my truck outside the shelter, eating a sandwich that tasted like cardboard. Maris never called me during work hours unless something serious was burning down somewhere. The second I heard her breathing, tight and controlled, I knew this wasn't a casual check-in. "Crosby," she said, her voice steady but strained, "you need to listen carefully and let me finish before you say anything." That alone told me the situation had teeth. I leaned back against the driver's seat and stared through the windshield at the dusty gravel lot. A volunteer was walking two nervous hounds across the yard, and for a second I wished my life was as simple as theirs. Eat, sleep, survive. Maris didn't waste time. "Your father's shop is in real trouble," she said. "Tax penalties, liens." The payment plan he had collapsed months ago. My stomach tightened, but I stayed quiet. She continued, and every word felt like another brick being stacked on my chest. "Your mother has been talking like she found a solution, one that doesn't involve selling property or admitting the shop is failing. That sounded exactly like my mother. She would rather burn down 3 houses than let the town see smoke from one." Then Maris said the part that froze everything. "They're arranging for you to marry into the Prescott family to settle the debt." I didn't answer right away. I just gripped the steering wheel and stared at the faded dashboard like the plastic might crack open and explain how my life had turned into a business transaction. Maris kept talking, slower now. She called me Sunday evening and tried to sell it like it was a brilliant idea. Said the Prescotts had resources, said the match would stabilize both families. "Crosby?" She spoke like you'd already agreed. My jaw tightened. "Did she say that?" I asked. "Yes," Maris replied quietly. She said the groom understands his responsibility to the family. That line told me everything I needed to know. My mother always talked like she was directing a play, and the rest of us were actors she'd already cast. After the call ended, I sat there in the truck for a long time. I didn't panic, I didn't rage. Something inside me just locked into place. All the pressure from the last few years finally made a clear shape. My mother didn't want influence, she wanted ownership. That night I pulled the notebook from the kitchen drawer and spread it across my table like evidence on a detective board. I flipped through pages filled with dates, phone logs, and scribbled notes that used to feel paranoid. Now they looked organized. I circled patterns. I pulled old voicemails from my phone and saved them to a flash drive. I printed screenshots of texts where my mother pushed, prodded, and threatened without ever using words that would scare a stranger. Everything went into 2 folders. One stayed in my apartment. The other went into the glove box of my truck. People like my mother depend on you being unprepared. They expect confusion and emotional reactions. What they hate is paperwork. Once the files were organized, I called someone who understood systems better than family drama. Juno Salazar answered on the second ring. Juno worked as a paralegal in the district attorney's office, and she was the kind of person who listened first and reacted second. I explained everything: Maris's call, the debt, the planned marriage arrangement, the years of pressure behind it. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she asked a few clean questions about dates and witnesses. Then she said the sentence that changed how I looked at the entire situation. "This isn't family tension," Juno told me calmly. "This is coercion." The next morning, we met at the county courthouse. Juno already had paperwork waiting on a wooden bench outside a clerk's office. She walked me through every page like we were assembling a case file, not airing personal drama. "Write the timeline," she said. "Facts only. Let the law decide the tone." So I did. I wrote about my father blocking doorways. I wrote about threats wrapped in concern. I wrote about the planned ceremony Maris warned me about. By late morning, a duty judge reviewed the request and signed an emergency protective order. The document ordered my parents to stay at least 750 feet away from me. It also opened the door for a formal complaint through the County Victim Services Unit. Juno looked over the papers once, nodded, and slid them back into a folder. But she wasn't done. That afternoon, she called County Dispatch and gave them my parents' address on Hawthorne Lane, along with a calm explanation of the situation. She told them I would be present there later that week while the order was active. When she hung up, she looked straight at me. "You never wait until you're trapped to ask for help," she said firmly. "You make sure help already knows where the trap is." Then she handed me the folder and told me to bring it with me Friday night. I slid the papers into my jacket pocket and walked out of the courthouse. Friday night came quicker than I wanted. The walk from the curb to my parents' porch felt like it took longer than it should have. I kept my phone in my pocket, recording, my jaw tight and eyes steady. I didn't want to look like a man coming home. I wanted to look like a man documenting a crime scene. I reached the front door and paused. It was already cracked open an inch. No creak, no latch, just open enough to send a message. "Come in, we're expecting you." I pushed it open slow. The air smelled like floor polish and candle wax. No food, no warmth, nothing you'd expect from a family dinner. The living room had been gutted of personality. No magazines on the coffee table, no jackets on the rack, no signs that anyone lived here besides the performance. Instead, the furniture had been rearranged to frame the center of the room. A small table with a white cloth, tall candles, a low floral arrangement, 2 chairs placed precisely across from each other, one side already filled. Taryn Prescott stood when she saw me, like this was a business appointment she'd been waiting all day to close. Her gray blouse and matching skirt looked ironed straight from the rack. Her hair was pulled back like she was applying for a loan, not getting married. She didn't smile much, just nodded, sharp and quiet. The folder in her hands wasn't decorative. It was thick with prepared forms. To her left, Orrin Kittredge sat stiff in an accent chair near the bookshelves, pretending he wasn't regretting every choice that brought him here. He looked up, nodded like a man told to be polite, and shifted the leather folder on his lap. His hand stayed tight around it. I scanned the space without turning my head too much. No other guests, no food, no music, just a ritual waiting to be enacted. Then my mother stepped out of the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel she hadn't needed. The smell of food was missing, but she pretended like she'd been cooking all afternoon. "There you are, sweetheart," she said, her voice sugar on glass. "We're just about ready." I nodded once, said nothing, and kept my steps slow as I moved forward. She gestured to the seat across from Taryn like it was already mine. "The papers are all set," she said softly. "You just need to look them over." The pen next to the contract had a little gold ribbon tied to it. My name was typed on the top line of every document, clean and pre-filled, like they'd practiced writing me out of my own future. I didn't sit yet. That's when my father moved behind me and shut the front door. The click of the deadbolt wasn't loud, but it cracked something invisible in the room. He didn't speak. He didn't glare. He just leaned back against the doorframe, big arms folded, blocking the exit like it was second nature. And for him, it was. I walked forward and finally took the seat they wanted me in. But it wasn't submission. It was math. I needed time. I needed the clock to tick a little longer while help got closer. My mother smiled like we were finally getting somewhere. Taryn opened her folder and began to speak in clean, formal language. "This is the agreement drafted between both families. It includes the partnership structure, debt assumption, residency expectations, and standard clauses." I held up one hand and cut her off. "I'll read it myself," I said. Orrin didn't say anything. He just sat there with his knees together like a middle schooler waiting to be dismissed. His face looked pale. Maybe he hadn't expected to feel guilty. Maybe he realized too late he was in the middle of something he didn't want to touch. My mother sat across from me, her face calm and perfect. The kind of calm that only shows up when someone thinks they've already won. I looked straight at her, then let my eyes drop to the papers. Her hands were folded on the table like she was hosting a game night. I flipped the first page, read slow. I didn't nod, didn't ask questions. I just studied it like a blueprint for a building I had no intention of entering. Behind me, I could hear my father breathing steady. That was his version of a warning. Nothing loud, just presence. The clock on the microwave blinked from the kitchen. I didn't need to rush. I just needed to wait. because the moment they stopped watching the clock was the moment mine would start. I let the pages rest under my hands for a moment before I started reading. My mother sat across from me with that steady expression she used when she believed a situation was already solved. She folded her hands on the table like she was waiting for applause. She didn't ask what I thought. She didn't ask if I agreed. To her, the only remaining question was how long it would take me to sign. I ignored the pen and pulled the contract closer. The paper smelled fresh, like it had been printed that afternoon. Whoever drafted it had taken time with the formatting. Headings, numbered clauses, polite language that looked harmless until you slowed down and read it like a mechanic studying a broken engine. The first thing that jumped out at me wasn't emotional at all. It was numbers. The document listed my bank balances with exact detail. Checking account totals, savings amounts, even the small emergency fund I kept separate. One number stopped my eyes cold. $9,165. That was my savings balance at the time, down to the last dollar. I hadn't told anyone in that house the number. I hadn't shared it with relatives or friends. I barely spoke about money at all, but there it was in black ink, typed neatly beside my name. I didn't look up right away, but I could feel my mother watching my face. She studied people the way gamblers watch cards, waiting for the smallest twitch that tells them the hand is working. I kept my expression flat and turned the page. The next clause explained where I would live after the marriage. It wasn't phrased as a discussion. It was an instruction. I would relocate to Prescott Timber property outside Pine Hollow. The wording said primary residence on family land, but the message was simple. Move there, stay there. There was no alternate address listed, no shared decision language, no exit option. It read like a transfer order. I flipped to the next page and found the employment clause. That one was written carefully, dressed in language about household stability and family integration. But the timeline was clear. Within 45 days of the ceremony, I would resign from my position at the animal shelter. After that, I would transition into household responsibilities and family-directed roles. In plain English, it meant I would no longer have my own income. My thumb paused on the corner of the paper as I moved to the final section that made the whole thing snap into focus. The clause didn't say power of attorney, but it built something very close. Financial oversight, shared approval for transactions, household account management handled by my spouse for the sake of long-term stability. It was dependence wrapped in polite legal language. Across the table, Taryn spoke in a steady, business-like tone. "These are standard structural protections," she said. "They exist to keep family partnerships stable." I looked up from the paper and met her eyes. "Standard where?" I asked calmly. She didn't answer me directly. Her gaze slid past my shoulder toward my parents, like the real conversation had always been with them. That told me everything about the room. I turned slightly toward Oren, who still sat stiff in the chair by the shelves. His posture looked like a man wishing the evening would rewind 10 minutes. "When did you get involved in this?" I asked him. He cleared his throat and shifted his folder. "Your mother contacted me earlier this week," he said carefully. "She informed me both parties had agreed to the arrangement and requested a licensed registrar to witness the signing." "You had never met me before tonight," I said. "No," Oren admitted, looking down. "This is the first time." "And the bride?" I asked. "I also met Ms. Prescott this evening," he said quietly. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft hiss of the candle wicks. My mother leaned forward slightly, her voice suddenly softer, almost sympathetic. "Crosby, sweetheart, I am doing this for your future," she said. "You have been alone for years. No direction, no real foundation. This arrangement gives you stability." Her words were smooth, but they carried that cold edge I'd known my whole life, concern used like a leash. "You should be thanking us," she added. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The movement was slow and deliberate. I walked toward the front door without raising my voice or knocking anything over. My father moved before I reached it. He stepped into the hallway space and planted himself there, shoulders square, arms hanging loose but ready. He didn't argue or explain. He didn't need to. The message was simple. "You're not leaving yet." I held his gaze for a moment, then turned back toward the table and returned to my seat. The microwave clock in the kitchen caught my eye when I sat down again. 7:21 in the evening. I slipped my phone from my pocket under the table and opened a message thread. One word. Now. I pressed send to Juno's number, set the phone face down beside my leg, and lifted the contract again. Then I kept reading. I kept turning pages like I was reviewing paperwork at a bank instead of sitting inside a trap. Across the table, my mother watched me with quiet confidence. To her, my calm meant the fight was over. She leaned forward slightly, preparing the speech she always used when she believed she had the final word. "You need to understand something," she began, her tone patient and sharp at the same time. "People in this town talk. They always have. Your behavior reflects on this family." I didn't answer. I just kept my finger resting on the edge of the contract. She continued, building momentum the way she did at HOA. Meetings when she wanted a room on her side. "You are 27 years old and still living like a boy with no direction. No wife, no property, no real standing in Pine Hollow. Your father and I are trying to give you something stable." The candles flickered slightly in the quiet. "You should appreciate that," she added. I looked up from the paper and turned my head toward my father. "How much do you owe them?" I asked. The question landed like a dropped glass. My mother's face tightened immediately. "That is not your concern," she snapped. Her reaction told me everything before anyone else spoke. "It is my concern," I said calmly, tapping the contract. "You're trying to settle it with my life." Taryn shifted in her chair for the first time that night. Until that moment, she had looked comfortable, like someone waiting for a routine transaction to finish. Now, a thin line of irritation appeared across her face. She didn't want a family argument. She wanted the deal closed. Oren looked between the three of us, his posture stiffening as the situation shifted. His hands tightened around his folder, and he slowly stood up from the chair. "I need to say something before this continues," he said carefully. "A ceremony like this requires voluntary consent from both parties." My mother's eyes snapped toward him. "Sit down, Mr. Kittredge," she said sharply. "Everything here has been agreed upon." Oren didn't sit. "I have not heard Mr. Archer confirm that," he replied. The room went silent. My father finally spoke from the doorway, his voice low and heavy. "Nobody leaves until this is handled." That sentence carried the same weight it had my entire life. A simple statement that meant the conversation was over and the door was closed. But this time, I said the words out loud. "You are preventing people from leaving," I said evenly. "That is unlawful restraint." The legal language shifted the room in a way shouting never could. It forced everyone to hear the situation differently. This wasn't family pressure anymore. It was a documented incident. I reached into my jacket and pulled out 2 envelopes. The paper made a soft sound when I set them on the table beside the contract. "What's that supposed to be?" my mother asked. I slid the first envelope toward her. "Emergency protective order," I said calmly. "Signed Wednesday morning by a county judge." She stared at the page as if the words might rearrange themselves into something harmless. The document stated my parents were required to stay at least 750 feet away from me. It was already active. I pushed the second envelope beside it. That one contains the complaint case number and filing confirmation with County Victim Services. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then my mother's phone buzzed loudly against the table. She looked down at the screen, and her face changed in a way I had never seen before. The confidence drained out of it like water leaving a cracked bucket. My father's phone buzzed next. He pulled it from his pocket slowly, reading the same notification. That was the exact moment when calculation turned into fear. People who live by control usually believe they're smarter than the system. The moment they realize the system is already watching them, their confidence collapses. From outside, faint sirens cut through the quiet. The sound grew louder as it moved down Hawthorne Lane. Taryn stood up immediately, closing her folder. "I was invited here as a guest," she said quickly, already stepping back from the table. "I have no involvement in any family dispute." Oren moved even faster. The second my father turned slightly to look toward the window, Oren stepped past him and grabbed the doorknob. The deadbolt slid open with a hard metallic click. He pulled the door wide and walked straight onto the porch. A patrol vehicle rolled to a stop in the driveway, red and blue lights washing across the living room walls. Oren raised one hand and began explaining the situation to the deputy stepping out of the car before anyone inside could interrupt him. Moments later, Deputy Sloan Hart walked through the doorway with calm, practiced steps. Her eyes moved across the room once, taking in every detail. The candles, the contract. My father standing near the door, Taryn holding her folder like a shield. My mother sitting frozen at the table. Deputy Hart didn't raise her voice. She simply pointed toward different corners of the room and began separating people so she could take statements one at a time. When she told my father to step away from the doorway, he hesitated for half a second. Then he moved. He stepped aside and left the exit clear while the deputy walked further into the room. When Deputy Hart gave the all clear, I walked out of that house without looking back. I drove in silence, both hands tight on the wheel, windows up, radio off. No victory music, no celebration. I wasn't thinking about what came next. I was just focused on staying steady. My body felt like it wanted to collapse, but I held it together until I got home. As soon as I locked my door, my legs gave out. I sat on the floor in the dark kitchen, back against the fridge, knees shaking like I'd run a mile in winter boots. It wasn't fear, it was release. My mind had stayed sharp through the whole performance, but now my body was catching up. By the time I got to bed, it was almost 2 a.m. The next day, I woke up to 37 missed calls. My mother never leaves voicemails when she's angry. She calls in clusters, 5 back-to-back, then a pause, then 7 more, like some kind of emotional countdown. Late that night came the longest wave, 11 calls spaced 10 minutes apart. That was her crying phase. She always does that when control slips, tries to make herself sound like the wounded party without saying a word. Just volume and silence, cycling. My dad called 5 times. No messages. That was how he did things. Let the phone ring, then hang up and make you wonder if something had gone wrong or if you were the thing that had. By noon, the town already had its version. Not the facts, the version. Mrs. Klein, the neighbor across the street from my parents, had filmed the police lights from her porch like she was covering a breaking story. She posted it to her Facebook with the caption, "Something major going down at the Archers." And in Pine Hollow, video always outruns truth. Within hours, I started hearing from Maris. She'd been cornered at the bakery by Aunt Lacey Mott, my mother's favorite gossip channel. Lacey was already repeating the rewritten script. He's unstable. He's been acting off for a while. He overreacted. Della was just trying to help him settle down. Maris told me the quotes exactly, word for word. She was exhausted but surgical about it. That's how she handles damage control. Get the details right, then move forward. I didn't argue online. I didn't call cousins or chase rumors. I kept still and let my phone do the collecting. Screenshots, timestamps, saved posts. I sent everything to Juno. She told me, let them talk. Talking creates evidence. A few days later, I got a call from the county's Victim Services Unit. A woman named Brenna Whitcomb introduced herself as my assigned caseworker. Her voice was calm, efficient, and direct. She said my case file was already over 2 inches thick and unusually detailed. She asked if I'd be willing to provide the original notebook, plus any audio or messages I hadn't submitted yet. I told her yes. That same day, Dr. Leora Phelps, my supervisor at the shelter, pulled me into the office. She didn't ask for a story. She just looked me in the eye and said, "Are you safe?" When I nodded, she said, "If anyone contacts the shelter or tries to pressure you through work, I'll log it and forward everything to you." She kept it short, but it hit harder than she probably realized. Then came the second wave. My mother didn't try to contact me directly again. She found a new route. She called my workplace, not the front desk, not the general line. She asked for Leora by name. Leora told me about the call later, tight-lipped and angry. "She told me you were mentally unwell," Leora said. "Said you weren't safe around the animals, that we should keep an eye on you or consider removing you from duty." She handed me a printout with the exact time, date, and content summary. Logged it as harassment, said she'd back me if it continued. I sent the report to Juno. She added it to the case file. The next day, my landlord called about an anonymous complaint. Someone claimed I'd been causing disturbances and unstable behavior. Said I was yelling at neighbors. Said I'd been seen acting suspicious around cars. The complaint was ridiculous, but it included details only someone close would know. My car make and model, my unit number, my work hours. That was the pattern. My mother couldn't get through my front door anymore, so she started knocking on every other one around it. She thought if she couldn't touch me, she'd isolate me, shame me, discredit me. I didn't panic. I did what I'd been trained to do after a lifetime under her thumb. I got factual. I asked for every report in writing. I logged the calls, I kept the records tight, and then I started building my next folder. Brenna's pace wasn't fast, but it never stopped. Everything came through clean. Emails, timelines, interviews, like puzzle pieces getting turned over one by one. She started with the obvious, the scene report from Deputy Hart. Then she requested witness statements from the neighborhood. She contacted Orrin for documentation, asked for communication logs, and filed requests for background on the Prescott name in the county system. Juno texted me 2 days later, "You need to see Orrin's emails." When I met her at the courthouse, she slid the printouts across the table like evidence in a trial. At the top was a subject line, "Ceremony confirmation plus prepared materials." My mother had emailed Orrin a detailed timeline, setup instructions, legal references, a payment receipt for his service, and one line that made the skin on my arms go cold. "The groom has agreed, and the bride is shy but compliant." She wrote me like I was livestock, not just willing, trained. I sat back in the chair and stared at the paper like it might catch fire if I held it too long. Juno didn't say anything. She just gave me the space to feel it without trying to soften the hit. Deputy Hart's official report came through next. The phrasing mattered. It said multiple adults were prevented from exiting the residence, including a county licensed official who was not allowed to leave freely. That's the kind of language that turns family drama into an investigation. Brenna included the report in the case file and flagged it for legal review. She told me in one of our calls, "This isn't about who said what, it's about what can be proven." Then something came through I hadn't seen coming. Juno forwarded me a handwritten note scanned into the file from Deputy Hart. It wasn't evidence, just context. A statement that the Prescott name had appeared in a past call several years back in an adjoining county. No charges filed, no formal record, but Hart remembered something off, enough to document and flag. The deeper Brenna went, the stranger it got. She asked if I'd ever met Taryn Prescott before that night. I told her no. She confirmed it with Orrin. Then Orrin volunteered a detail that stayed with me. He said, "Taryn came in prepared, binder organized, tags marked, speech memorized. Not like someone doing this for the first time." He didn't say it like an accusation. He said it like a man trying to figure out what role he'd just played. Then, late one evening, my father called me. Not to yell, not to threaten, just to talk. His voice sounded different, smaller, more cracked around the edges, like he wasn't sure how to begin a sentence with no orders behind it. He didn't start with, "I'm sorry." He started with, "I didn't think you'd bring the law to the house." Like, that was the sin, not the contract, not the trap, the exposure. I didn't answer. I waited. Then he broke. Not all at once, just a crack, but enough. He admitted the debt out loud. $58,700. Said the payment plan failed months ago. Said the Prescotts made an offer that sounded like a miracle. He called it a solution. Then he said the part that stopped my breath short. She wouldn't sell anything, he said, meaning my mother. Not the second property, not the boat. Said it would humiliate her. So she said you were the next option. The next option. I didn't speak. I didn't yell. I just let him keep going. She'd been talking about filing guardianship paperwork, he said, low and flat. Said if anything happened or if you started spiraling, she should be the one to handle your finances. Asked me to sign it. I didn't. That was the missing puzzle piece. I knew the contract hinted at control, but now I had confirmation she'd tried to get it legally before the marriage arrangement even existed. I recorded the call. I didn't feel proud of it. I felt prepared. Because when you've lived under narrative control, the first thing they try to steal is memory. That's why the notebook mattered. That's why the recordings existed. You don't win arguments with people like that. You show the receipts. Juno added the call transcript to the case. She used it along with the workplace call and landlord complaint to show ongoing contact attempts after a protective order had already been served. Then she said something I hadn't heard phrased like that before. Most people think a protective order is a wall, she said, but really it's a tripwire. Your mother keeps stepping on it. By the end of the week, the case wasn't about one night at Hawthorne Lane anymore. It was a documented pattern from 5 directions. My notebook, Orrin's emails, Hart's report, Leora's workplace log, and now my father's own voice. We weren't talking about family drama anymore. We were talking about proof. The morning of the hearing, I didn't dress up. Khakis, button down, clean shave, nothing flashy. I wasn't trying to impress anybody. I was just there to finish what I started. My mother walked into the courtroom looking like she was campaigning. Pale blue blazer, hair curled just enough to look effortless, and that politician smile she wore like armor. Her eyes scanned the room like she expected to find allies. She didn't. The judge, older woman, no-nonsense voice, flat delivery, didn't blink at my mother's presentation. She looked at the stack of documents Juno handed over and asked Juno to walk her through it. Juno didn't dramatize. She didn't have to. She just laid it out piece by piece. The proposed marriage contract was pre-printed with financial and employment restrictions. The event was staged as a family supper, but was structured to trap Mr. Archer without prior consent. A protective order was granted on March 4th after documentation was reviewed. She slid the registrar's report forward. This also includes testimony from Orrin Kittredge, a county-certified official, who was prevented from leaving the residence during the attempted ceremony. Deputy Hart's report confirms that detail. Then came the screenshots of the workplace contact and landlord complaint. The judge flipped through them slowly, lips pressed together in a thin, unreadable line. My mother finally spoke up, voice syrupy with concern. I was worried about my son. He's been distant, isolated. I was simply trying to help him make a stable life. The judge cut her off with one question. If this was about concern, why was a marriage contract prepared with his bank balance and a forced employment resignation clause? No one spoke. My mother blinked, opened her mouth, then shut it again. There was no way to spin it that didn't sound like control. Brenna's notes sealed it. She had submitted a formal case summary that stated, "Reported family concern aligns with patterns of sustained control and reputation management, not safety or mental health support." That phrasing hit hard because it used legal language to name exactly what my mother had been doing for years. The judge didn't hesitate. She extended the protective order and gave a direct warning. Any future attempt to interfere, directly or through other parties, would be escalated. No lecture, no sermon, just consequences. The fallout in Pine Hollow didn't explode. It cracked. Nobody screamed. Nobody confronted her in public. That's not how towns like this work. People just stopped trusting her. HOA, members who used to back her, started pushing back on small things, meeting topics, budget votes, party planning nonsense. And then the real shift happened. 2 neighbors filed formal ethics complaints, one anonymously, one openly. Both said my mother had used HOA resources to harass residents. Apparently, I wasn't the first, just the first to say something loud enough to be heard through a courtroom door. Within 4 weeks, she stepped down from her HOA position. She called it personal scheduling conflicts, but everyone in town knew she'd been pushed out. Her name disappeared from flyers and email blasts. She stopped hosting events. That landed deeper than any fine ever could. Taryn Prescott backed off too. Not because she felt bad, because exposure is expensive. Once victim services, a county deputy, and a court order were involved, the marriage solution stopped being convenient. According to a note Juno later shared with me, the Prescotts pivoted to a structured repayment plan with my father. He started selling off equipment from the shop, saws, motors, diagnostic tools, said he needed a clean house. Translation, he was scrambling to meet the new terms without using me as the currency. He called me once during that stretch, said, "I hope you're happy now. You burned the only bridge we had." I didn't argue. I let the call end cold. Because the truth was, that bridge had already rotted out years ago. I just stopped walking across it. A week later, I sent a boundary letter through the proper channels. No contact, no messages through third parties, no workplace interference, all communication in writing through legal counsel. Any violation would be logged and pursued. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration of terms, like any adult gives when they finally reclaim their life. And the last nail in the narrative? She couldn't rewrite it this time. Not with half the town watching, and a stack of court documents that said otherwise. Her voice didn't matter anymore. The record already spoke louder. These days, when I drive past Hawthorne Lane, I don't slow down. I don't glance at the porch, don't check if the lawn's overgrown, don't think about the lilies. I just pass it like any other street in Pine Hollow. That's what freedom actually looks like. Boring, forward motion, no flash. I still work at the shelter, still open the gates at 8 sharp, still handle the paperwork myself, still fix busted food bins like it's an emergency. Same job, same beat-up office, same peace I used to feel guilty for liking. My mother called the life small. Now, I call it mine. Most Sundays, I meet Maris at Mabel's Diner. Same booth in the corner when it's open. She always gets there first, orders me a plain coffee with a little sugar and one cream packet on the side. She never brings up the mess unless I do. That alone makes her family in a way no bloodline ever guaranteed. Juno stops in now, and then when her schedule allows. She doesn't play the hero, doesn't need to. We sit and talk about paperwork, housing policies, the county budget. One time she said, "The system only works if you force it to see you." She's right. People like my mother count on you hiding in shame. I still keep the notebook. It's in the second drawer of my desk, wrapped in a rubber band, pages marked with tabs I'll never remove. I don't open it often, but when I do, it isn't for revenge. It's to remind myself I didn't imagine it. I didn't overreact. I didn't break under pressure. I recorded it. After the hearing, my mother sent long emails, paragraphs full of guilt trips, digs about my manhood, questions like, what kind of son walks away from the people who raised him? I never responded. I just archived them. Silence isn't weakness when you choose it on purpose. Months later, my father called. One line, heavy and flat. "Can this be over?" I told him. "It ends when the behavior ends, not when you get tired of consequences." He hung up without another word. That was the last time I heard his voice. The closest thing I've had to revenge isn't watching them hurt. It's watching them realize they can't reach me. They can't lock a door and wait for me to fold. They can't forge my signature with a tablecloth and candlelight. They can't use shame to turn my life into currency. What I learned, late but clean, is that boundaries aren't punishments. They're fences around what matters. And a man's got the right to build a fence, even if the people outside it are family. I didn't burn the family down. I just shut the door and kept walking. And I don't answer knocks from people who tried to sell me. Hold up. Before you scroll, tap the hype button. If you've got it, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. When someone uses family as an excuse to control you, what boundary would you set today?